Everything you need is water. Good.
Welcome to the Heart to Heart virtual town hall meeting. I'm real excited about this one. It's domestic violence. This one sits really close and personal to my heart. And I think that we're going to learn some great stuff today. We're going to have some great resources. I have some wonderful sisters. I love when my sister girls get together and we talk about our gift and our purpose. I think this is going to be an amazing conversation. We'll start with my sister, Amina McWinter. She's my ex-co-worker and sister, and really excited about her journey. And she's the founder and executive director of Love by Handles. We'll get from you, Amina, who that is and what that is. And then we have with us the amazing Takitha K. Wilson. Now, she's an author, entrepreneur, speaker, change advocate, and she's here as well as a representative of the Shepherd's House International Church. Those are my friends over at the Shepherd's House. So thank you guys so very much for being a part of today's virtual town hall meeting. Amina, let's start with you. Tell us what Love by the Handles is.
Well, thank you so much, Cheryl. You know, you mean everything to me. I'm so glad to be on this show this evening. So Love by the Handles, we are a local foundation, nonprofit, 501c3 here based in Washington, D.C. And what Love by the Handles does is that we are focusing on homelessness, domestic violence, and our at-risk youth. One thing about our foundation, as I'm the founder of the foundation, but one thing about the foundation is that we have our motto that we are loving the community one bag at a time. You know, a lot of times when we give items to nonprofit organizations, many times we always put trash bag, right? So when you're giving items and you're donating, put them in a trash bag. But the name Love by the Handles is so unique because when we give things to our recipients, especially when it comes to domestic violence, the victim may not have decided to leave their abuser yet. So we give them anything with a handle on it, especially if it is a female with a purse. So if they're not ready to leave, they're carrying the purse, the handbag back in the house. And in the handbag, it will have resources for them to be able to really find that empowerment to be able to leave, so that they will come in kind of secretly, where it will not be something that would be so obvious to the abuser. And it would give tools, it would give empowerment, it would give motivational, inspirational quotes to just keep them until they're ready to make that move and that safety plan. I'm also from Love by the Handles. I'm an author of 3 books, but one in particular is Shush No More. And it's really breaking the silence of domestic violence, but abuse in all different forms, which I'm sure we're going to talk about that tonight. So thank you again for this opportunity and for us to really eradicate domestic violence, not just end it and bring awareness, but to start to make sure that we eradicate this. Thank you.
I know that you have to have a strategy when you decide, because a lot of women or even men, because I don't even want it to be gender specific. I know that the statistics say that it's more women that's been abused with domestic violence, but I know that there are men as well. We know verbal abuse is a thing. We'll get into a deeper conversation about that. But I like the fact that Love by the Handles also gives you a plan. You know what I mean? It helps you to create a strategy as to what you need to do, because love shouldn't hurt. It should not hurt. It doesn't hurt. And so I'm excited about tonight's conversation. We'll get deeper into what you guys do, deeper into how people can find out more about your resources. But I want to talk with Takitha, because I know that she's full because of her own testimony and then because of her ministry gift that she offers to the Shepherd's House. So I want to talk about domestic violence in the church and all of that. But Takitha, first tell us about you and your organization. And, I got your EP. It's so wonderful. It's so cute, girl. You did your thing on it. But I know your testimony is very powerful. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. Again, everyone, I'm Takitha Wilson. I am the ministry leader of the domestic violence ministry here at the Shepherd's House International Christian Church, where our pastor is Pastor Kevin Matthews, First Lady Melissa Matthews, and it's an honor to serve you all. We at the Shepherd's House, we just really have a focus on caring for people and equipping people and preparing them. And that doesn't limit us just to a church environment. We're all in community. And so we service our community as a whole, including the public. So if there's a male or female that is struggling and dealing with domestic violence, we have a ministry that supports victims and survivors of domestic violence, a support group. We also have resources and also educational tools. So we have a pretty robust program where we can support both the victim and the survivor, both male and female. For me, I'm a survivor of 4 cycles of abuse.
Wow.
And so I have a testimony about that. My first cycle of abuse was same-sex molestation. I was molested by 2 girls as a young girl, at the age of 7 and 8. The second cycle was bullying. My bully lived in the house with me. I wasn't able to escape like some people have a tendency to do. My third cycle of abuse was sexual assault. One day I was walking to school in middle school. I was sexually assaulted. And the fourth cycle was domestic violence. So I'm a living testimony that you can survive it, you can heal from it, and you can be restored from it.
What do you think attributed to the 4 cycles? I know that a myth is that, the one that's being abused would try to blame themselves, or even in the midst of abuse, sometimes the abuser blames them for the act of abuse. Like, it's the reason I'm doing this is because of you, or you're the reason. But there was 4 cycles in your life. What do you attribute to those 4 cycles? What is the common denominator in that?
Trauma is the common denominator. Domestic violence is not a violent act where people think it's just random. It's a public health emergency, just like coronavirus is. And as a healthcare professional, it's something that we really need to pay attention to. It's public health. It can impact everything. And so for me, it was just various cycles of trauma. I grew up as a young girl. Both of my parents were incarcerated at the time, but I still was able to be in a family household within my family. I was fortunate enough not to go into foster care. And so for me, you can say the quote unquote, I did not have a father figure. I did not have this. I did not have that, but I still survived it and I still lived, but I still had sustainability within my life. So although I didn't have a father figure in my life who lived in a home, it didn't mean that I did not have a father figure. I still have males who contributed to me in my livelihood and my lifestyle. And so that was really, really great, to sustain me. But over time, just going through the multiple levels of trauma and abuse, there is a level of low self-esteem that takes place where victims do have a tendency to take it internally as if it's them and they're internalizing it. Well, I have to stay because I often felt like I needed to fix situations and be the superwoman. And that's just not the case. I can't save everybody. And I didn't allow God to be God in my life. I was acting as God, to be honest. And so that was another piece that really was very instrumental in why I continuously stayed in various cycles. I did not want to let go. It was almost as if I was a hoarder.
Wow. Go ahead. Go ahead, Amina.
I was saying I would totally agree with you because one of the major reasons why I started the foundation was being a survivor myself. And from the standpoint of as a teenager, realizing that I had to live in my truth, that I had low self-esteem issues, right? And so everything that she was saying is true. My first abuse act that I didn't realize was abuse, I didn't even talk to my mother about it until I was 25, was when I was 6 years old and I was sexually assaulted. And so when you start to look at the pattern of what she was saying about trauma, it's very much so true. And a lot of times it starts as a child and then it moves into your teenage, your adolescent years, adolescent, teenage years. And then from that being that broken little girl, for lack of better words, and moving into your teenage years to adulthood, now you're not making wise decisions in relationships. And so for me, being a survivor, I didn't even know that I was a victim of domestic violence. because I was married for many years, over 20 years. And I did not know that I was in a relationship, even from a teenager and as an adult, into a relationship that showed non-physical abuse. So as I know that we're going to continue this conversation tonight and we're going to focus on different types of abuse, that is very important. And I am a product of the fatherless generation. And, when I look at being a survivor outside of domestic violence, I realize, I'm a survivor, period. I'm a survivor from the statistics of being a teen mom. I'm a survivor of being a strong Black woman from the fatherless generation. I'm a survivor of being an African-American woman who had skin cancer, and I'm a survivor of that. And so when I went through that, I'm like, oh, well, that's just my theme. I am a survivor, but not understanding the different realms and levels. And so it's very important that we do deal with it, even when it comes to our teens, because teenagers face domestic violence, dating violence. And unfortunately, a lot of times as youth, and even as the adults, the parents, we label them, oh, they too young. They don't know what love is. And unfortunately, they're in unhealthy young relationships that if we don't, be specific on what's happening in their relationships, then they're going to be older men and women in this pattern. And we need to break that generational curse over even our young people.
Absolutely. And it's so interesting because I bet all those that are hanging out with us on Facebook and YouTube, I can imagine that somebody has dealt with domestic violence in their family. The statistics for domestic violence is unreal. I pulled some statistics with regards to domestic violence. It said every 9 seconds, a woman in the US is beaten or assaulted by a current or ex-significant other. Every 9 seconds. 1 in 4 men are also victims of some physical violence of an intimate partner as well. And so it's not just a female issue. It's not just a woman issue. But for me, that's astonishing. Every 9 seconds, which means somebody on this call, everybody that's hanging out with us tonight probably has a friend or family member or somebody who's dealt with domestic violence. Dysfunctional households. My testimony is that my aunt murdered by my uncle. My mother's sister was murdered by my uncle, and it was before I was born. It was long before I was born. And my mother and my aunt were very, very close. They were literally 11 months apart, right? So they were raised like twins. My mom was like the baby of the family for a very long time, and she was the I didn't want to say the strong one, but she was the feisty one, the one that would fight. Right? Whereas is where I get my fight from. My mother was that would fight. And although she was younger than her sister, she was the one that was always like protecting her. And there was an era, believe it or not, in our culture when men felt like they had the right to put their hands on women, right? Like it was like, I'm the head of the household. I'm the man. You do as I say. It was almost like a disciplined situation. I can think of other uncles in other situations where the men of that generation, felt like, put her in her place. We saw The Color Purple. We see, certain, and there was an era when men felt like they needed to put them in their place. And then the mothers would even say to their kids, that's what subjection was. That was submission to your husband, or that was, that's just, he's dealing with the weight of the world. And he bring that into the household. Fences really hit home when I thought about that too. He's bringing the weight of the world home. So you gotta endure all of this stuff that but that society has placed on the male, right? And so in that situation, that was long before I was born, but it was still such a taboo. It was still such a hot topic in our family. Like when my aunt was murdered, domestic violence is not tolerated. I mean, uncles and cousins and men from all different, parts of our family would step in if there was a man that was abusing another family member, because they are not on this watch, not on this family watch, not on this Holloway watch, the people that were in my family, the men were like, you're not doing that again. You're not killing another one of our sisters. So it was very prevalent. If men looked like they were doing something to any one of our cousins, they were coming from the country, honey, to deal with this man,
Wow.
So domestic violence is very near and dear to my heart. I wish I would have known my aunt. My mother talks about her, and my mother has dementia now, but if you mention my Aunt Teeny, it's still in her heart.
Oh.
You know, she's never forgiven, you know, my Uncle Walter. She's never, you know, he was never able to, you know, and he had a son that my grandmother raised, and he was raised like my mother's brother. And he had no rights in our family. Like, and my cousin actually rehashed a relationship with his dad because he was locked up, of course, because of the murder. And then when he came out, he wanted a relationship with his father, but he was forbid. And that thing was a taboo. It was something. You know, even when I think about it now, you know, I think my grandmother went to her grave with that hatred in her heart. And she was a church mother, you know, but you took my daughter.
Yeah.
So this thing called domestic violence is very near and dear to my heart. And I'm glad that we're having this conversation because you guys made it out. Like, you survived to come back and talk about it.
I just wanted to say something to that effect, what you just said, because it affects the entire community. It's not just the immediate family members. And so, like you said, you're in the next generation and you're still affected by this, right? So it has no limits. It doesn't discriminate. And when you look at the impact that it had, it wasn't just you, your mom, you know, the children who were involved. Children deal with domestic violence just as much as adults do. And so that's something that we always have to keep in mind. It doesn't just stop at the adults, you know? And then when you think about the level of impact that it has on any community, the judicial system, the healthcare system, you know, domestic violence can be fatal. You know, people have to understand that it's that serious, that it can be fatal, and people are often killed from it. They don't come back. You know, you have to lay your family member to rest, but there's always a level of healing. It's very constant. So you may need counseling. You may need to talk about it. You may need to write about it. You may need to have a family meeting about it, because it's so continuous, because you have triggers and feelings may come up.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow.
It's ongoing. It's not
and then what about that? What you know? I want you guys to touch on this too. Is the level of example that we're teaching children, like the abused father who has now a daughter or a son who becomes an abuser, because this is the norm, right? I've dealt with that too, in dealing in couples ministry or even youth ministry, where there's an angry streak. And it's a learned behavior of how you deal and interact with people because they've seen mommy and daddy deal with it. This is their normal. Talk about
I can say to that. Go ahead, Amina. Go ahead.
Thank you. It absolutely is, because a lot of times the big piece to that is the hypocrisy. Okay, hypocrisy of not wanting to let your children know the truth, however that may be. And the reality is sometimes you can't even let your children know the truth because you don't know the truth. And you have not been honest to yourself to say, you know, I'm in an unhealthy environment. I'm in an unhealthy relationship. And then don't add the different levels of spirituality to it, you know, and different things for why you stay. And when you really deal with the fact of not being honest to yourself, that's the reason how come around domestic violence is the slogan of breaking the silence, you know, however that may look. Now, one thing that I teach, especially when I'm in the empowerment groups and so forth that I'm doing in the city, I talk about it from your point, Cheryl, of this piece, domestic violence. Before you get to the violence, it's all the non-physical abuse acts. An abuser is never going to say, hey, baby, I love you, bam, and hit you in the eye, grab up your neck. They're never going to do that, because we're walking right then, that first date. You know, that's not going to be an option. That's why it's called domestic. What is happening in that domestic, in that home, in that relationship before we get to the violence? And that's all of, if I can go ahead and mention it, that's all of the types of abuse. May it be mental, may it be verbal, may it be emotional, may it be financial, may it be sexual, may it be even spiritual, parental. All of these are different forms of abuse before we get to the physical. And so that's the part that my organization that we really focus on, because even with me, I wasn't a victim of physical. I was a victim to a survivor of the non-abusive forms. And so with that, that's the part that you have to really talk about. And that's the part that has been spoke on more in maybe the last 15, 20 years. Because when people hear about domestic violence, they immediately like, oh, they ain't beating on me. Okay, that may be true. But what are they saying to you?
What are they
How is your
saying?
mind being? What level of what levels of intimidation is happening? What part of isolation has happened? What part have manipulation has happened? And let's deal with what abuse is, the mistreating, and then the fear from control. So this is the part of these important conversations that we have to educate our communities on really what's domestic violence. And then to be honest, that there's many people, as was mentioned before, there's many people that are in very prestigious positions that are suffering in silence every day from being victims of abuse. And this conversation, and tonight, with God's help and with us coming together in sisterhood, we're breaking that silence, and we're going to have some deliverance coming up tonight where people are going to move into survival.
That's right. That's right.
That. Did you want to touch on that, Takitha, as well? But I want to move into the realm of domestic violence in the church, because I think we really need to talk about that. But did you want to touch on what Nina was saying?
Yes, I just wanted to touch a little bit. So keep in mind that we often talk about the women who are victims of domestic violence, but there's also, we have to always speak up for the men as well, because there are women who are very abusive to men. There are women who are very controlling of men, who take a whole paycheck, who stalk men, who slash tires, who pull gasoline. I mean, those are acts of domestic violence. Okay. When a man walks outside, his car is sitting on bricks. We see it on social media, digital abuse. You can slide in somebody's DM and harass them, put all of the naked pictures out there. So let's just keep in mind that it can go both ways at any given moment, because there are some women who are still controlling. There are still some women who are very manipulative. There are still women who are very abusive. And it just may seem that it's always the men, because the men are, of course, they're stronger and the men are the head of the household. But we have to keep in mind that there are women out here that are just as predatory as a man is. And so when you talk about the level of control, of course, like Amina said, it doesn't start off like a hit. It may start off as simple as this. I don't like what you're wearing today, Cheryl. I think you should change your outfit. And so you may say, oh, no, babe, you want me to change my outfit? Oh, okay. Cheryl, don't go out with your girls today. I think you should stay home with me. So now you stay home one time. You miss hanging out with your girls. The second time, you're slated to go out. And then what happens? You're not going out again. So the pattern starts very slow and subtle. It's small as isolation. How do I isolate you, one, from your family and your friends? Because those are your support systems. How can I isolate you from any given community that you're in? How can I isolate you from your sorority? How can I isolate you from your fraternity? How can I isolate you from your church group? And so if I can pull you away from community, then I have you in one area. Now that I have you isolated one-on-one, now I can play on you mentally even more and emotionally. Now I can wrap my hands around your emotions and walk you any way that I want you to go. I don't want you to go outside today. I want you to just stay in. Let's just cuddle. Let's just spoon. So you think it's very innocent.
Right. Well, it's cute. It's cute in the beginning.
Right? So it adds up. So now you're,
and then they go to the honeymoon phase, right? Then they go to the honeymoon phase. Where it's like,
then they go to the honeymoon phase. So now I slide you away, and then if I want to do something to you, I can pop you, I can hit you, and then I can make love to you again and tell you I'm so sorry. Let's kiss and make up and buy you all these gifts, and now you're in a repeated cycle of abuse, just like that. It's it can very easily happen. And so it's not just like, oh, okay, well, you walked up to somebody and you got into a relationship and now you're getting smacked around or beat around, or I'm taking all of your paycheck. It's not like that. It's very, very subtle, very subtle.
Wow. I'm hearing control. I'm hearing isolation.
Yes.
And I don't want to mispronounce her name, but I think it's Tabila Muhammad says, speak on manipulation.
Yes.
The word
Manipulation.
Yeah, and the thing about manipulation, and I was just about to post this because I oftentimes post messages for marriages and for women on my page just to think about and to ponder about. And one of the things I talked about was verbal abuse, right, in the men, but also manipulation when it comes to women, because God has given us the power of persuasion as women, right? We have the power of persuasion, but used in an evil kind of way or used in a selfish kind of way can turn into manipulation. And manipulation is witchcraft. And we
can turn into Jezebel. That's where you get the Jezebel from.
That's where you get the Jezebel thing.
You hear that all the time.
Domestic violence. Yeah, let's talk about that. That becomes manipulative. Manipulation is another one of those words. Thank you so much for that comment. If you have a comment and you're watching on Facebook, be sure to leave your comment, your question for either one of these ladies. We're going to dig deeper into this conversation. If you have a comment or a question for these ladies, for me, for any of us on this panel, please do so. Please ask the question. We want to be able to address your questions. This is why we're doing this until 8:30, because we want to give opportunity for you to, if you have questions. We have some of the women that are passionate and that are professional, have studied their craft with regards to this topic. And so, yeah, and please share. Thank you, Gwen Murphy. Share. All right, I want to jump into domestic violence in the church, because you don't hear people talk about this over the pulpit. You don't hear a lot about this, but church can be manipulative sometimes within itself. I know in the Pentecostal church, some of the things that we were taught was manipulation into salvation, which was a wrong way. So a lot of that went back into people's homes, right? And so people are silently suffering in the church because, this is a marriage, like Amina said, had gone on for 20 years. This is a marriage that has gone on for a number of years. The look of, what does it look like if brother and sister so-and-so divorce in the church? What does it look like if the pastor's divorce and there's some domestic violence going on behind the scenes in the church? We kind of silence these things. And a lot of times, Takitha, in the church, the pastors will tell you to stay in this relationship because of how it looks to the body of Christ.
Right. So let's just talk about it. To be really honest here, domestic violence thrives in secrecy, first and foremost. Anytime you're holding that secret, you're keeping it, you're not exposing it. So it's just like any other darkness. You have to put the light into it. How do you put the light into it? You speak up, you expose it, and you tell the truth. Mm-hmm. And so when you talk about it from the church perspective, yeah, there are many couples who may be in any place of worship that may be suffering in silence. But one thing that you have to do, you have to see, okay, how do I go and seek help? A lot of times people don't even know where to start. They're too ashamed to feel like, I don't want to put my business out there to the church, because what if somebody exposes my business? So confidentiality is very important. And so when you look at it from the church perspective, the word of God, it's true, it's sharp. It can cut through any bone marrow. It can cut through anything, including domestic violence. And so when we say right now, there are ministries out here to support, that's what the Shepherd's House International represents. We have a domestic violence ministry because we know in our area, in Prince George's County alone, the numbers are very high. Wow. And so it's not limited to just nonprofit organizations providing help. The church is just as powerful as any organization on this earth, any organization. Because and when you think about the area that you can touch in as it relates to the church, there are some people who have misguided couples. There are some people who have not studied the word of God, divided the word of God, and used it in a way to manipulate couples. And that is a form of spiritual abuse. Mm-hmm. And that's something that we're beginning to see more and more. There are people who are speaking up about that. And so it's not the end all be all if you get a divorce. God can restore you. And so when we often talk about domestic violence, how do we support you? At the Shepherd's House, we have a support group called Divorce Care. Because if you're going through a separation and divorce, you need to be in the community with people who are just like you. And then you have to be able to talk about it. This has been hidden for so long, and it has caused so much division. And that's one of the areas where the enemy fights us the most. As long as we're divided, he continuously wins. But when we're in community on one accord, in unison, we are so powerful. And that is what we maintain. We maintain a sense of community and we love on one another. So don't be afraid to speak up. Yes, the church can be just as powerful as any organization, but so many people fear that if they go to the church, what will happen?
Right.
Well, let me tell you a story. Before I became a member of the Shepherd's House, I was at another church, and that church is no longer in existence. But do you know that my abuser came to the church?
Wow.
Do you know that he came into a Sunday service? But my pastor stood toe to toe, and he went with me not only to the courthouse, he stood toe to toe right there to make sure that I was protected. So it may look just as bad for some angles as it relates to the church, but the violence can be anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just the church.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that when we look at the church, we hold the church in such a prestigious and an honor as we should, because we're God's children.
Mm-hmm.
But we're not limited to the fact that God can't turn this thing around and heal all of us, because that same abuser might turn around and be just as powerful and impactful by sharing his testimony or her testimony to save those who are still in it. So God doesn't waste anything. It's just a perspective. And a lot of times society dogs us and it puts us with all of these stigmas and myths. And all we have to do is just take the time to unravel it and speak the truth. And that's how we begin to really show up and win. Wow. We always win in God. God is not going to sit up and allow us to be in a situation like a domestic violence relationship and think he's not going to win and turn it around. He always wins.
That's good. That's good. Amina, what you say? You had something to say on it?
Yeah. Yes, and I will add, everything she was saying is so true. However, my story will be slightly different, from the standpoint of what you had mentioned, Cheryl, is the reality is that sometimes we do feel that in church, and hence the reason why a lot of people don't talk about spiritual abuse, and there has been churches that are stepping up as this church is, as she's saying, but there has been many churches in the past that has not. And a lot of times it's because things are so prevalent in the church when it comes to that. And people are ashamed to talk on those different kind of topics. And for me, that was one of the biggest things. And growing up and being raised in a Pentecostal church, like you were saying, Cheryl, where it's like when things would transpire and things in the relationship may not be what is what you should talk about. You feel that taboo. And a lot of times people isolate you, even in church, to be like, baby, don't you talk about that. Or they may spiritualize it so much as to say, and that's just the devil, Or it may even be, don't do the self-fulfilled prophecy over your marriage and your life. And so it's certain things where you start to be like, oh, well, should I talk? But then when you do have the ministries that do stand up against it and say, this is something that is really happening. Families are being broken because of the silence of what we're saying about this. And one thing that we do have to continually to talk about is what Takitha mentioned before, is men that are being abused, right? And so women that are maybe being controlling and manipulative. And so these are things that we have to discuss across the board when it comes to it. And I know that for me, my biggest thing was, before I made a decision to say, I need to really see what's happening and change my situation, is it started to affect my body. It started to affect my health because I was suffering in silence. And so with that, I had to realize, like, wait a minute, I need to change some things, and I do need to speak up and talk. And within our community, especially amongst African-American community, we have to understand that counseling is really important, especially when it comes to your healing and going to a spiritual counselor, may it be your pastor or a church leader, and also clinical, seeking that help, because you're not an island. You cannot stand alone. And I appreciate the question that you asked, Cheryl, because a lot of times people do not want to talk about two major things when it comes to abuse: spiritual abuse and domestic violence, and they do not want to talk about financial abuse. And a lot of times the financial abuse and the spiritual abuse in many cases go hand in hand. And then when you're dealing with the parental abuse, because now you have children and young people who are being abused and victimized even in church. And it's like, We don't want to talk about that. But we have to expose the enemy so that we can bring the healing that God has for the body of Christ. And that is breaking the silence, as we're doing tonight.
I love it. I love it. And, I mentioned it through the ministry and through church, not to downplay churches, but I think that there are some churches that will fuel it. Like the Shepherd's House International, I commend them and commend you to Keitha for even having a department or a ministry in the church that specifically touches on domestic violence. That's not across the board. And for somebody like your pastor who would take on the initiative to know that this is a safe place. If you are in an abusive relationship, you can come here. Yeah, bring your husband, because guess what? Deliverance can happen here in the church as well. You know what I mean? So I get that, but that's not across the board. And I don't want to like downplay or, dog the church, if you will, but I do want to talk about the truth and some things that may fuel the fire of domestic violence. I'm so excited about our next guest. We've been talking about our next guest being a special guest on our in our show. I had opportunity to interview her before. Her testimony is very powerful. I'm talking about Mildred Muhammad. She's an award-winning global keynote speaker, international expert speaker on the for the U.S. State Department, certified consultant, U.S. Department of Justice. I know people always talk about her just being the ex-wife of the DC sniper, but she really does have some titles behind her name, expertise in a number of areas where she's been helping and healing people who have been affected by domestic violence. I love how you've turned your pain into purpose. I love how people have been able to glean from you and learn, and how you've taken this whole situation of the DC sniper and turned it into something that will be empowering for people all over the world. So welcome to our Heart to Heart Domestic Violence platform tonight. God bless you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me. I was just listening to what all of you were saying, and everybody is on point. Everybody is on point. The one thing that I would add is that domestic violence doesn't have a religion. It happens in the Jewish community. It happens in Islam. It happens in Christianity, Jehovah's Witnesses, some with religion, some without religion. It happens everywhere. There's no educational or financial status. There's no gender. It happens.
Absolutely.
So I just wanted to bring that, because some people are hard on religion. Some people leave religion because of the help they did not get.
Right.
And some people go to religion for the help that they do get.
Mm-hmm.
So we have, it's a balancing scale. So we just have to make sure that we give an overall picture and not try to just look at one particular sector.
I agree.
All of us.
I totally agree.
And we have to know that at the end of the day, love should not hurt. So it doesn't matter what, just as Mildred was saying, it doesn't matter where you are as far as that, is that love should not hurt. And that when we get to that place where love is causing you to be sad, love is causing you to want to leave a particular religion and things like that, then you really have to step back and say, no, this is not right on so many different levels.
Well, that's not love.
And I did mention the church.
That's not love.
No,
love,
right. Exactly.
Love would open up your heart. Love would love your every part of you. When it's not love, that's when you leave. Mm-hmm. That's when you start to understand that, I have to love myself more than I love this person. I can't influence or involve this person in every aspect of my life, and then they turn around and become they didn't become, they were already that. So nobody snaps, nobody changes. They were that way the whole time. Time and circumstances made them feel comfortable to bring it out. And by the time they bring it out, you've already told your friends and family, oh my God, this is the man or woman of my dreams. I finally found him. You cannot go back to those people and say, I'm abused, he or she did this or he or she did that, because they're going to look at you like you're strange. And what's the first question they're going to ask? Didn't you see the sign? Didn't you see that come? Well, no, I didn't, because I met the representative. I didn't meet the real person, right? And so when the abuses start to happen, and it's never the physical assault is never first. It's the verbal assault. That's the first assault to domestic abuse and violence, because we have to understand that we put domestic violence under an umbrella, but there are two sections of that. There's domestic abuse and there's domestic violence. Domestic abuse is the 1 to 8 second verbal, psychological, economic, stalking. Then it goes to a physical assault. Now you're hitting me, you're throwing me up against the wall, you're using a knife to cut me. Two different things. And some people get lost because when they see the poster, then they hear the stories, they only hear the violence part. But what about those of us who never experienced the violence? We only experience the manipulation. We experience the narcissist. Oh my, that's a whole different topic altogether. The covert narcissist is just another topic under the narcissist.
Yeah.
So it's so many levels to this, and you have to make sure that the information that we're giving captures everybody, so that nobody feels left out. Where they're talking about the violence, but I mean, he didn't hit me. Well, so then that falls under domestic abuse. So what are those? What are a 1 to 8 seconds? Because it takes 9 to 15 seconds when a woman is abused. So what about the 1 to 8? What's happening before it gets to the 9?
Right.
Why are we talking about those? How can we come in right here? Can we get right here before we get to the 9? That's what we have to talk about too. A lot of people don't know that.
The things that leads up to.
Yeah, what leads up to the 9 to 15 seconds.
Got it.
And abusers are men and women. We know that.
Yes.
But they're also husbands, they're boyfriends, they're pastors, they're imams, they're police officers, they're your best friends, they're your boys, they're your girls. Your boys know that you hit me. Your girls know that you hit me. But what do they say? Well, I don't want to step into another man's house. Well, I don't want to say anything because that's their business. As soon as you hear it, it becomes your business.
And you touched on
what
that.
happens.
You said something real poignant there too, that it doesn't have to be a spouse. It doesn't have to be, it could be a friend. Because when you start saying things like control, you have, people that try to control you, like, you know what I mean? And
but that steps over to a whole nother topic that they don't necessarily call it domestic violence. That's just, me and my friend, we don't get along. That's, me and my brother, my sister, they tripping. That's how we look at it. But it's abuse, no matter how you look at it. And when you're in a relationship and you hold back your affections for someone because you're trying to punish them for what they didn't do, that's abuse. It's called alienation of affection. That's abuse. So why would you hold your intimacy to punish somebody? First of all, you're not my mom and you're not my dad. Okay? We should be able to talk about a situation to bring clarity so that the intimacy continues to flow. If it's not flowing, it's a problem. For a woman, it's a problem up here. You gotta help me up here before something else happens. Otherwise I'm just a zombie.
So I talk about,
if they don't want to participate, what do? They take it. So then that's rape. So
I want to go backwards a little bit.
We can't say rape because they changed the language from rape to sexual assault because the word rape is too harsh for the rapist.
Yep.
So we say sexual assault.
Sexual assault.
Okay. I want to go back a little bit, Mildred, and I want to talk about your testimony because I gave the other ladies an opportunity to talk about their personal experience. And for those who don't know your history, I want you to share your history of domestic violence and why you've taken on a life of changing lives and making this a passion of yours and a profession to make sure that lives are changed. But talk about your history.
Well, my story began in Tacoma, Washington, and John and I were married for 13 years, and we have 3 children. I asked, to make a long story short, I asked him for a divorce. He said he didn't want one. He moved out after threatening me, and I had to get a restraining order. When I got the restraining order, the judge told me I really needed to get away from this guy. I said, Your Honor, I'm really trying to do that. So they gave me a lifetime restraining order. However, we had to have visitation with the children.
Wow.
So he had the children. The first weekend, everything was fine. Second weekend was my mom's birthday, March the 27th. And he was supposed to have them back Sunday at 5:30 because we wanted to take my mom to her favorite restaurant, which was Country Buffet. He didn't bring them back. They were gone for 18 months. Before he left, he emptied the bank account, told the landlord that he would not be paying the rent. And so subsequently, I was evicted. Prior to that, I was signing for a package for my mom on Mother's Day. I passed out. They took me to the hospital, but only two people knew where I was, and that was my mom and the lady across the street who was looking after my mom. My phone rang, and it was John. And he asked me, What are you doing? I said, Why won't you let the children call me? He said, We don't always get what we want, do we? The victim and the abuser has a dialogue that only those two people understand. John had told me, You have become my enemy, and as my enemy, I will kill you. I didn't play with that. Someone threatened to kill you, that's real. It's not a game. They mean it. He was going to shoot me in the head and bury me where no one would be able to find me. So when he says he took the children so that I could come back to him, I knew what that meant. So I had two choices. I could hang up the phone and never see my children again, or I could go back to him and die. And I hung up the phone. I cried out to the nurses. They came in and I said, Can you trace the call? They traced the call to a woman who called the hospital to find out where I was. My mother called shortly thereafter and said that John called her to say that he is on his way to the hospital to kill her daughter. So the police took me out of one room and put me in another. They posted a guard outside my door, took my name off of the register. Anybody who was coming up to see me had to show their ID because they did not know how John looked. A social worker came in and said that we need to move you. I said, But what about my mom? They said, Don't worry about your mom. We'll take care of you. But there are three things you need to do before you leave. One, you need to change your name so that when someone calls you, you will respond. So my safe name is Mildred. Two, we're going to bring you clothes because you can't dress the same way that you were because we don't want anybody to recognize you. So they brought me some different clothes. The third thing they told me to do, which was the most difficult of all, and that was I needed to disconnect from everybody that I knew because no one could know where they were taking me. So we waited until it was dark. They slipped me out of the back door of the hospital into a car. They told me I needed to slouch down so no one could see me. But I was looking at every rooftop and every open window because I knew it was going to be a headshot. So they drove me all around, and actually the shelter that they took me to was right across the street. When I got to the shelter, one of the staff members said, Millie, you're in luck. You get your own room. Like, I want to be in the shelter. I get to the room and I'm thinking, how did I get here? I mean, I'm a businesswoman. I'm taking care of my mom. I'm taking care of my children. The next day I wake up, it's 18 women in the house. I knew. I'm sorry. Okay. There were 18 women in the house. So I was able to get my divorce while I was in the shelter. So October 6, 2000, I got my divorce. I was able to get a writ of habeas corpus that anywhere they found my children, they needed to pick them up and bring them back to me. Washington State had just passed a law stating that if you are a victim of domestic violence, You can leave the state without being charged with kidnapping, and you do not have to tell the abuser where you are going. I had all of my paper notarized. My sister, who lived in Clinton, called me and said that our mom was sick. She said, "Can you come and help? Have you found the children?" I said, "Well, no, I haven't found them, but I can wait over there." So I could hear. I filed my restraining order with full faith and credit so that he could have the same power to Tacoma, Washington, here in DC and Maryland. That's where I filed my restraining order. I called the FBI. I told them that my children were kidnapped, that they were no longer in the country. They sent over an agent, Agent Jensen Jordan. He said, "Ms. Muhammad, how do you know you are no longer in the country?" I say, "Well, my cousin is a private investigator, and he said when the trail runs cold, that means the people that you're looking for are no longer in the country." So he took my paperwork, he mailed it back to me 2 weeks later and said, "Ms. Muhammad, I'm sorry, there's nothing we can do. This is an ongoing case. We're going to refer you back to the FBI agency in Seattle." He gave me a number. I called it and I said, "Sir, I'm looking for my children. They're with their father. I'm in hiding. I don't know where they are, but they're out of the country." He said, "Well, Miss Muhammad, since we know that he's looking for you, what we want to do is we want to put you in the middle of a parking lot and use you as a decoy. This way we can lure him out." I said, "Excuse me, it's going to be a headshot. You're not going to know which way the bullet came from." And I hung up the phone. August the 31st, I received a call from the executive director. She said, "Millie, I think we found your children. You need to call the detective in Bellingham, Washington," of which I did. And he said that they found them, but I needed to come back to Tacoma for an emergency custody hearing. I go back to the emergency and custody hearing. John is in the courtroom. He said, "Your Honor, she already knew what those children were." And I'm just shaking like a leaf. I am scared. And he said, "Well, since her paperwork was done pro se, which meant I did it myself, and it is in perfect order, she will get custody of the children." John said, "Your Honor, you tell me I won't be able to see my children again?" He said, "You have to go through the same process as she went through. Case dismissed." We waited for him to leave out, to go outside the courtroom. My attorney, my advocate, and I all went in the hallway. My attorney is calling to find out where the children are. All of a sudden, I feel a presence behind me. I turn, I see John. I run down the hallway. My attorney and my advocate looked at John, they looked at me, and they ran too. We all waited for him to leave. He put his hand on the courtroom door, looked at me, and said, "Gotcha." My attorney said, "Nope, we got to leave. We got to go." So we go down to the police station. We head over to social services. That's where I'm reunited with my children. We fly back to Tacoma, Washington in September of 2001. Fast forward to the shooting. They told us to look for two Caucasians in a white box truck, right? Everybody looking for that. I'm looking for John. Everyone's looking for two people. I'm looking for three. October 11th, my coworker picked me up for work, and she said, there's a dark colored car outside your cul-de-sac." I said, "Girl, don't worry about it." She said, "But it just don't feel good." I said, "Don't worry about it. Just go to work." So we go past the car, and the passenger, the driver looks at us, but the passenger holds up the newspaper to hide himself. I said, "Did you see that?" She said, "Yeah." I said, "Give me your phone." We called the police. They said, "Can you describe the car?" I said, "It is a dark colored Caprice or Impala with New Jersey plates, two African American males seated in the car." They said, "Okay, we'll send someone over." October 23rd, ATF and the FBI knocked on my door. They said, "Miss Muhammad, when was the last time you seen John Allen Muhammad?" I said, "Why are you asking me about him?" Because my palms started sweating. They said, "We just want to know. We just want to know when was the last time you seen him." I said, "September 2001 at an emergency custody hearing." They wanted me to come down to the police station, which I did, asking some questions. They say, so that was the last time you seen him? I say, yes, it was. They say, look, Miss Muhammad, we just have to tell you. We're going to name your ex-husband as the sniper. I said, what? So do you think he would do something like this? I raised my head and I said, yeah. They said, well, why would you think that? I said, because we were watching a movie. And he said, I could take a small city, terrorize it. They would think it would be a group of people and it would only be me. I asked him, why would he do something like that? And he just changed the subject. They said, well, Miss Muhammad, didn't you know you were the target? I said, well, no, why would I think that? I said, well, there was a man that was shot 6 times down the street from you. They took his laptop and $6,000. There was another man that was shot in Brandywine 2 miles from you in the abdomen. Miss Muhammad, you were the target. Would you like to go into protective custody? I said, you have to ask me that? They say, well, yeah, some people don't want to go. I say, well, do you know where he is? I said, no, ma'am. Have you caught him yet? No, ma'am. And you still have to ask me. Yes, ma'am, we do. So they put me and my children, my sister and my brother-in-law into protective custody. The next day is when they caught him. And so now we're trying to put our lives back together. I tried to get counseling. Unfortunately, I was unable to find ethical counselors. Everybody wanted to be famous. So I went to the library, I got a book on counseling, and I learned how to counsel me and my children myself. I needed them to be emotionally balanced children. And that's what we did. I told them that the only way we're going to get through this is with the truth. So whatever question you ask me about your dad, I will tell you the truth, even if it makes me look bad. I did not then, nor do I now, speak badly to my children about their dad. They are old enough to come to their own conclusion about everything that has happened. We are not going to be held responsible or accountable for the actions of a man who made a conscious decision to do what he did. In order to make sure that my children were able to find closure, I took them to the funeral. I needed them to have closure to that point. I didn't go inside, they did. They needed to be with his family. They needed to understand and come to a healing that was the only way that I felt they would be able to receive that. And once we came back, we blossomed. But I told them this, you cannot use your dad as an excuse for failure. You got to bring me something better than that. So you're not going to be going around here talking about my dad is a DC sniper and I can't make it. Nope, that's not going to work with me.
I thank you so much for sharing your testimony. I wanted people to see the full perspective. You and I had talked before, and the repercussions that of people trying to blame you for the death of some of the ones that your husband killed.
They said if I would have stayed
Yeah.
with him, then he just would have killed me. If I would have stayed on the West Coast, then the people on the East Coast would still be alive. How dare I call me and my children victims when none of us were hurt or killed? And how dare I bring this drama into this quiet community? So victim blaming was at the highest degree for me. People wanted to be my friends at night, but they didn't want people to know they were my friends. Then you can't be my friend.
Wow. And that's what happens in situations of domestic violence is, and this is why a lot of people stay, because they know that there's the repercussions. Everybody's not going to receive you leaving or not, staying. But if you don't, you risk, like we talked about, losing your life. And I'm grateful that you're here to tell the story and to talk about the passion. I know that you guys have books. I want to be able to talk about your books before we go into going into the next hour. Maddie Sullivan says the strength you are showing is so amazing. That's to all three of our guests tonight. You guys are powerful.
Can I say one thing?
Yes, please.
In terms of leaving, economic, and people feeling that no one will love them again are two other reasons why people don't leave. When I say people, I mean men and women. Some men were not taught to get a woman. And so there are women that will taunt that man to
take advantage of that,
where it's difficult for them to leave because they were raised to be family men. 85% of victims that are women are abused by men. 15% of men are abused by women. However, during this pandemic, domestic violence has gone from an epidemic to a pandemic within a pandemic. Okay? 20% of new marriages have ended in divorce because of domestic violence. So you're meeting people and you don't know who they are. I mean, we're all locked down. I can put on my mask. You're not going to know who I am. And then, bam, what in the world just happened? I thought you said you put it. It's hard to discern online. It's hard. You can't go out on a date. You can't do any of that. All I'm saying to you is whoever you're seeing online or meeting somebody during this time, take the extra time. You say where it took you 3 months, give it 6 to make sure that you know who you have allowed into your sacred space.
I want to touch on that. Domestic violence during the pandemic. I want to give each one of our guests to talk a little bit about domestic violence during this pandemic. Since we're closed in with the abuser, what are some steps that we can take? I mean, any one of you guys can take the question, some steps that they can take, because I know, Amina, you have your Love by the Handles, where you can't get to a number of these victims right now during the pandemic to get your product to them, or Shepherd's House is doing things virtually now during the pandemic, and they're a sponsor of ours, which is why we're talking about what they do in their ministry to curb domestic violence. But then even Mildred, some practical things that women or men that might be facing abuse right now during the pandemic while we're social distancing. I want to give each of you an opportunity to share some things that they can do, some ways we can curb it.
So one thing with me, to your point, Cheryl, about the foundation prior to the pandemic, is that yes, we did a lot of things into the community and going into different people's homes and shelters and so forth. But because this is our new normal, then having to be very innovative and creative, because people are still hurting in high numbers like never before. And so I definitely focus. I did it before, but I still do it now, is that text messaging, instant messaging, social media is very big. Of course, I do a lot of my support groups now. Majority of all of them, of course, are virtual now on a different networks and different things that we have. But one of the things that I do want to make sure I touch on, especially with what Mildred was saying, is that so many victims, again, men and women, they really got caught up with the stay at home, right? Especially in the beginning when the pandemic was at its height. And it's still happening now, but between that March and July and then going into the summer, it was very, very, everyone's attitude was very aggressive. And one thing about the organization and what I have been able to do is I've partnered a lot with police departments, because what happens is if the victim does not want to file a protective order, then the police hands are kind of tied. So they need organizations, they need people like us that they can be able to partner with to be able to help empower those individuals that are not ready to quite leave. And so many people felt as if, especially with COVID, with the coronavirus, so many people felt like, well, I don't want to go to a shelter. I don't know how I'm going to be able to function into a shelter. So what is it that I can do? And the reality of the matter is there are still protective orders that are out. there are still resources to be able to help us during this time. Yes, do we have to be very mindful? Do we have to have safety measures and PPEs and all of those different COVID measures? Absolutely. But the work doesn't stop, because individuals are extremely aggressive right now. I can tell you that the level of support that I've had to help in the community has been at its highest. And what I mean by that is it's just random. When I say random, I mean acts of violence that are just happening right in front of me.
Yeah.
Wow.
I can be inside of an establishment. I was inside of an establishment very recently, and a woman got ran over by her abuser outside of where I was.
Wow.
And so I'm saying that the aggressions and different things that's happening is because of where we are. Unemployment at a height.
Yeah.
Mental health. We can't talk about one aspect of abuse and not even talk about trauma and mental health as well. And so for me, those are different things and signs that I do make sure that they know, victims know, organizations know, people know that we are still here to support our victims to survivors.
Awesome. Let me ask Takitha real quick, and I do want to talk about your book, Mildred, after we talk with Takitha, to give us some insight on what they're doing during the pandemic.
So at the Shepherd's House, you can contact us through dialing the church office, but you can also go through the website. But there are all other measures that you can also do. Online, there are hand gestures you can make if you're doing a live video to let someone know that you're dealing with domestic violence. There's also safety planning that should always be in place. So when you're prepared to leave, you are prepared to go. And a lot of times victims have a tendency to save or store up resources before they actually flee. And it depends on whatever they feel that they need to do. Statistics show that a lot of domestic violence incidents take place at nighttime. And so visually, when you look at the fact that there's less visibility because it's in the night, it's dark, okay? People often have to safety plan, meaning if I have to save $5 and put it in a shoebox and put it in the ceiling or put it in the dryer so that my abuser won't know, I'll continuously do that. But they have a plan. And sometimes it's friends, it's family members who help. Cheryl, if you're my best friend and I come to you and say, I need help, I expect for you to help me. Although I may have been isolated from you, there are times where people really know deep down inside when you're really at your breaking points, right? And so like Mildred had somebody there with her. I had a support system. My best friend was there with me. But I'm saying that because there are so many different things and steps that you take to really finally flee. Your mind is already at a place where you're saying, I'm gone. I'm not even in this anymore. So your mind mentally is you have already exited that relationship. And so if it means that if I have to give you, Cheryl, a copy of my ID as my best friend, a copy of my passport, my social security card, these are all documentation that I may need, because if my abuser gets a hold of it, I'm not going to ever see it again. The same thing with the children, knowing safety words, how to pack a bag, have a bag in the car with clothes and money and toiletries. These are all things that are needed. So it really depends on your level of fatality or vulnerability. They would say severity is the word that I'm looking for. So your level of severity, because everybody's domestic violence situation is different. If you're a person who's single, who doesn't have kids, you can go and just go to flee into a hotel or a shelter. But if you have kids and then you have a dog, now it's a bigger issue, because now I have a pet and I don't want to leave my pet because my pet has to come with me. And so these are all things you can call the domestic violence hotline at 1-800-799-SAFE. Those are resources for you where you can, 24/7, they're available. You can dial 211, you can dial 311. There are resources. There's so many different things that you can do and take advantage of. But again, sometimes people don't even know where to start, because they just know that it happened to me and now I'm in shock. And so my initial response is, how do I move from this point on?
Awesome. So teleworking is now a reality, is what Mildred Muhammad says. Domestic violence cases are rising. And Mildred has a book that's called Being Abused While Teleworking During Coronavirus Disease 2019 Pandemic. Talk about that book for us, sister.
Well, this is a downloadable book. It's a safety guide for victims of domestic violence, and it's a guide for bystanders and employers. And inside of that is a comprehensive safety plan, 8 steps.
Awesome.
8 means transformation. So you're transforming from a victim to a survivor in that process. For the book is downloadable, and the reason why I created it that way is because we're in a pandemic. Who's the first person that's going to go to the door to accept a package? The abuser. So the abuser sees the book, probably will never get it. But you go to Amazon, download it, you can put it in a secret file, and you can read it at will. So what are some of the tips? I agree with the pastor. I'm sorry, I don't.
Takitha.
Yeah. So forgive me, please. That you have to have a safety plan, you have to have a bag packed, money set aside, and all of that. And since we're in a pandemic, we have to raise that level. So I may not be able to put money aside in the car, because now he's driving the car and he opens the trunk and sees the stuff, and so where you going? So you have to raise that, take the clothes to somebody else's house. One person, because more than one will go right back to the abuser, and you're planning for naught. Because what you have in your favor is an element of surprise. You got to keep it as long as you can. Go to Walmart, get you a Walmart card. Have your money, $20 transferred from your paycheck to that Walmart account. No money has to exchange hands.
Wow.
I helped a woman this week. She was trying to get a restraining order, 20-year marriage. Didn't hit her. Terrorized her children. How do I get a restraining order? Go from the time you go to court, go back 2 months. Document date and time and the incident. If you have witnesses, get notarized statements from them. You have to build your case. That's what I had to do. I had to build my case to help the police to bring me the justice that I need. Because you can't go to court and say, well, he did this Tuesday, he did this Friday, last week he did. You gotta show a pattern of abuse when you have no physical scars to prove that you are a victim. You're on a Zoom call. Employers, they need to have mandatory visual meetings, not a crop picture, not a still picture or a picture of a fruit or whatever. Leave the microphone on if you are a victim of domestic violence, so that other people can hear what's happening and they can call the police because they know your location.
That is so good.
You need to have a one-on-one meeting with that person every week so that they can see if they have any bruises, if they can hear any abuse happening in the back. Bystanders have changed. Now they're your next door neighbor. If you're in an apartment, if you're across the street, you hear that violence going on, call the police. You know, sometimes we're afraid to call the police if we are people of color. I mean, the man just on the scooter was just killed by the police for riding a scooter. No crime going on in the area. We just have to, and I have received calls from victims, women of color, who want to call the police but are afraid because they don't want their partner to be killed. So that's a whole nother element that we're dealing with here. So it's easy for some people to call the police, but it's not for everybody. So we try to de-escalate it on our own, and then we end up being killed or hurt. Because I just want you to fix them.
Right.
I don't want to leave them I love him. He's the father of my children. He wasn't the same man that I met. Can you just fix him? I just want you to. I've actually had a woman. I just can't. I just want you to fix him. Fix him to where he was before. I say, man, he was never that person before.
Wow.
You have to look at the man that's in front of you. Because the man in front of you has been the man in front of you
the whole time. That's right.
He didn't change.
That's right.
He's been the same man.
Yep.
Wow, this is so good.
So
we
I
have a question.
I wanted to add to that really quick.
Okay.
A lot of in healthcare right now, a lot of healthcare providers, when you go to the doctor, they're asking you questions. And so a lot of physicians, because we are in this pandemic and we're seeing a lot of increasing cases, your physician may ask you questions now. Okay, when you do your questionnaire, but even when you go back to be screened, they may ask you, has your mood changed in the last few days? And if you have a pattern of domestic violence with your physician knows good and well when you come into that office, there are signs. And at one point in time in my abuse, my physician, he recognized it. One day I just went to say, my back was hurting, but my back really was hurting. I had not been hit or anything like that, but because I had a pattern of domestic violence, he was concerned. And so, you know what he asked me? Did he hit you? And so you can also utilize your physicians as well. When you go into that doctor's office, you can still opt not to have your abuser there. And so sometimes abusers may try to be aggressive to get their way back there, but your rights are protected. And so you can use that and get into that doctor's office and say, I'm not leaving back out until, you get me to a safe haven or a safe place. So that's another way that you can escape, another way you can flee, but also just using that as a safety route.
This is so good. Somebody else.
911 and order a pizza.
Yes, I heard that.
This has happened across the country, that dispatchers know now that when a victim is calling to order a pizza, they know to send the police right away.
We have a question from our Facebook viewers. What would you provide as first steps, immediate steps for someone who is suffering, especially while possibly facing it more during this pandemic? What are some first steps? I know we gave a number of steps that we can do, but what is one thing? Because I love the fact that all three of you guys in your story were proactive. I heard Mildred's story about, restraining orders and, finding ways to get out. I mean, just really, when you're in the midst of it, you're not really thinking like that. But you guys were very, very proactive. What are some immediate things that people can do right now? Some first steps, some immediate stuff they can do, like right now?
Right now, call the domestic violence hotline, 1-800-799-7233.
Give it again, please.
I'm sorry?
Give it again, please.
1-800-799-7233. You can also go to domesticshelters.org. Type in the city and the state, and it will give you a list of resources that are available in your area. Another thing you can do is don't argue with your abuser. Don't give them something to hit you upside the head with, so to speak. The way that you can take back your power slowly, because you can't do it, got to do it slowly in a pandemic, is not to engage, because they can't argue with themselves, right? So the more you argue, the more you feel it, especially with a narcissist, the more you feel that antagonizing environment. If you could, and this is for men and women, this is just not women. If you could just let it flow until you can pack your bag or two. If you have family members that know that you are a victim of domestic violence, because all of us know somebody who is or was a victim of domestic violence. Call them. Don't email. Don't text. Call them, because the abuser will know that somebody is checking on them, and they will not be so quick to hurt them. It's only in silence. It's only when they're isolated, when they don't think that somebody's going to call them. Now, texting and emailing, they can disconnect, but calling, that is what has been helping a lot of victims that I have been assisting to call. I've been helping soldiers that have been contacting me. It's a whole nother level that are in abusive relationships, men and women. There's the LBGTQ. Please help me if I'm saying that right.
Yes.
Hold on. They're contacting me because some of the resources that we're talking about are not available. They're not available to women of color, children, and the gay community. They've just had a report on the news with that. So we have to be proactive in how we are going to leave. I have a safety plan. It's called Planning My Escape that I have on my website, mildredmuhammad.com, but it's also in the downloadable book. And it's 8 steps, and it tells you what you need to do. It's a list of items that you need to take if you're planning to start your life over somewhere else. You have to have your driver's license. You have to have your medical reports. You have to have your shot records for your children. You got to have all of these things, and it's a list. And
it can become overwhelming when you're in the midst of it, right? So to have something at your fingertips, like the downloadable book, like telemarketing, it's great to have like that checklist that they can always refer to, because it can get a little overwhelming. Like, I got to do this first and that first and this first and that first. But to have a checklist of things and have a plan in place, I heard Keitha say, have a plan in place. We're winding up to the end of our town hall, but I definitely want to give each one of you guys an opportunity to say where people can go to find out more about the ministry, more about the Love by the Handles, and also more about you, Mildred. I know you gave your website, but I do want to give resources for all 3 of you ladies to our audience before we get out of here. So let's start with you, Amina.
Thank you. So my organization, as we talked about it before, is lovebythehandles.com or org. And one thing I do want to say, to just piggyback on what Mildred was saying and the question that was asked about the steps, is everything she was saying is so important and true. And one of the biggest things that I want to say based upon my story and my testimony is speaking out, even to your friend or your family. I think that is the biggest thing, where sometimes as victims, and even having the low self-esteem and being scared, and especially depending on who the abuser is, where you don't want to speak out sometimes. And you also think about the safety of your family and loved ones in case you do. But that is very important, because if nobody knows, if you haven't shared with anything, you're suffering still yet again in silence. And I will never forget, for me, when I did finally leave, I did have people say, well, why didn't you say anything? And it was a shame. It was a part of my being ashamed, but it was also not trusting. And so even with the organization and with different people, reach out, even if you are ashamed or embarrassed or scared, to call the National Domestic Violence Hotline, because of children are involved. I had a woman who was scared to call because she was scared that CPS was going to take her children. So these are real situations that people do that they don't want to call. And then a man don't want to call because of pride, but yet he's being abused himself. So please reach out. Again, lovebythehandles.com or .org is my organization. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Takitha?
So I just want to say thank you, Cheryl, so much. And thank you to Praise 104.1 for the opportunity. Life after the domestic violence, you can thrive. I just want people to understand that it was not the end all be all for any one of us here. We stand before you as living testimonies that you can make it and you will make it. You're not alone. And silence is not golden in the world of domestic violence. The moment that you speak up, you are restored, you regain your power, and you feel empowered, and you continue. So we're able to stand before you because we're fighting for those who are on the other side of this. And we will continue to fight and continue to press on because we have the strength enough to show you that you are able to make it. One of the things that we offer here at the Shepherd's House International Christian Church, you can just reach out to our domestic violence ministry online at theshepherdshouseinternational.org. You can also call the church office at 301-599-0555. Those are two resources. You can go into our Facebook page. You can send a message to the Facebook page. You can go into our YouTube channel. You can reach out to us. Any method, it doesn't matter. You can join us live on Sunday mornings. If you're afraid and you just want to type something in there that says "help me," you can do that too. We're always here to help you. But I just want to say that I was able to make it out. I went to therapy. I did a lot of work on me, and it's continuous work. I stand before you because it's not over, and I fight for those who are still in it, and I will continue to fight. And my legacy is that my son is still on the battlefield with me. So although he did witness the abuse, we are fighting together. And so I just say kudos to everyone here. Thank you so much. And we look forward to serving you.
That's so good. Thank you, Takitha.
Thank you.
All right, Mildred.
Okay, well, you can find me on mildredmuhammad.com. I'm a certified professional and personal development consultant. So my website is myfocusllc.com. Also, another thing is we have to change the narrative. We have to stop asking victims, why do they stay? And start asking the abuser, why do you abuse?
Oh, that's good.
When you ask a victim that question, you have to understand that you're putting the totality of the abuse on the victim and acting as if it is their fault that they are in an abusive relationship, and you totally take the abuser off the hook.
Yeah.
So change that narrative. Ask the abuser. You know who that abuser is? Ask him or her, why do you abuse? Yeah. Instead of asking the victim who's scrambling to try to find an answer that you will accept. Why does she stay? He or she stay. That is the most, to me, it's an insensitive question to ask someone who's just trying to understand why they are being abused in the first place. We have to stop that.
I love it. You all have been so amazing. I learned so much on this platform, even as a moderator and things. And we are praying for those who are on this call that you got something from this town hall meeting, that you use the resources that's been provided. Thank you so much to our sponsors, to the Shepherd's House International, to Pastor Kevin Matthews, who is always so actively involved in the community, to have such a ministry there and to have you represented. Takitha, thank you so very much. Please let Pastor know we appreciate him and all that he offered today. Amina, thank you so much for your input and for Love by the Handles. Thank you so much for dedicating your life to this type of work. It's so great to see you again, sis. Here today. And Mildred, thank you so much. Because you are the epitome of a national catastrophe, a national tragedy, and turning that thing into something more victorious. It's so awesome to see how God has used you in your worst situation and scenario and turn it around to help others to not only just talk about it, but you went to school, you studied, you found ways to really dig deep and become professional at this. There, all three of her books are listed right here on the banner. Check out those award-winning books. Get the telemarketing downloadable book right now that you can use at your fingertips. You guys have given us so much information today. I don't want to overwhelm people, but I do love the fact that there is a pinpoint as to where they can go to find information. Please excuse all the background because people are in my house. This is the world with dogs.
Love yourself. Love yourself. Love yourself more than you love your abuser.
Yes.
That's the first step.
Yes.
Once you start to love yourself, you will not ever be in that position again. You will recognize it. But, not today.
Not again. No, you won't. No, you won't.
And that was the central focus of what we said in the beginning.
Right.
But I love that you stamped this at the end too, Mildred, is that really turning that work, doing the work on yourself, doing the work on yourself, not blaming yourself for the abuse, but making sure you have done the work on yourself. Love yourself enough.
That's right.
Love yourself enough. And I think that's the core of it all. Keitha hit that in the beginning. And I think this is awesome that we're leaving with that. But thank you, ladies, so very much. I am honored to have you with us today, Mildred Muhammad. We are so honored. We bow down to you and your greatness and all that you brought to the table today. Thank you so much. Thank you, Alina. Thank you to Keynote. I can't wait to hug you guys personally. Thank you for your time. I believe someone was really, really encouraged and has learned something from today's town hall. Have a great night. Thank you.
You all do the same. Bye-bye.
Thank you to all who hung out with us tonight. We appreciate you. Thank you for the management at Praise 104.1, Radio 1, Urban 1. Thank you to all our viewers and listeners. You guys have an amazing night tonight.
Thank you. Good night.